The dusty streets of Abilene, Kansas, ran red with the blood of a man nobody knew the day Eliza Mae Thornton stepped off the stagecoach and into a world that would reshape her heart forever. It was June 1878, and the late afternoon sun hung heavy in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. Eliza clutched her carpetbag tighter as she watched the marshal drag the dead man's body toward the undertaker's office, leaving a dark trail in the dirt. She had traveled from Philadelphia to take up a position as a schoolteacher, and already she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The frontier was nothing like the romanticized stories she had read in dime novels back east. It was raw and dangerous and utterly unforgiving. "Ma'am, you might want to step aside," a low voice said behind her. Eliza turned to find herself face to face with the most striking man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty work shirt. His hat was pulled low, but she could see dark hair curling at his collar and eyes the color of weathered leather. A shadow of stubble covered his jaw, and when he tipped his hat to her, she noticed his hands were calloused and strong. "I apologize for startling you," he continued, his voice carrying a hint of Texas drawl. "Just trying to keep you from getting trampled. The cattle drive comes through in about 2 minutes and they do not stop for anyone." As if on cue, Eliza heard the thunderous sound of hooves and the shouts of cowboys driving a massive herd down the main street. The man gently took her elbow and guided her up onto the wooden sidewalk just as hundreds of longhorns stampeded past, their horns clacking together, dust rising in thick clouds that made her cough. "Thank you," Eliza managed, trying to catch her breath. She was acutely aware of his hand still on her arm, the warmth of it seeping through the sleeve of her traveling dress. He released her immediately, as if suddenly conscious of the impropriety. "James Holloway, ma'am." "Most folks call me Hollow on account of my last name, but you can call me what you like." "Eliza Thornton. I have just arrived to teach at the schoolhouse." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she could not quite name. "A teacher." "Well, I reckon the children here could use someone with learning. Most of them can barely write their own names." "And you, Mr. Holloway, can you write your name?" A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rather stern features into something almost boyish. "I can write a good deal more than that, Miss Thornton. My mother was a schoolteacher herself back in Virginia before the war. She made sure I knew my letters and numbers before she passed." "I am sorry for your loss," Eliza said softly. "It was a long time ago. I was 12. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Where are you staying? I can help you with your bags." "The boarding house on 5th Street, I believe, Mrs. Henderson's establishment." "That is a good place. Clean and respectable, Mrs. Henderson does not tolerate any nonsense." He reached for her carpetbag and a trunk that had been unloaded from the stagecoach. "It is just a few blocks. I will walk you there." They moved through the bustling streets of Abilene, passing saloons where piano music spilled out into the evening air, general stores with windows displaying everything from bolts of calico to rifles, and restaurants where the smell of frying meat made Eliza's stomach growl. She had not eaten since breakfast, and that had been nothing but hard biscuits and weak coffee at a way station. "You will find Abilene is not as rough as it looks," James said as they walked. "We have got a good marshal now, and most of the real trouble happens outside of town. The cattlemen who come through can get rowdy, but they move on quick enough." "What do you do, Mr. Holloway? Are you a cattleman yourself?" "I work a small ranch about 5 miles out. Mostly horses, some cattle. I come into town for supplies and to help out when the marshal needs extra hands." He glanced at her sideways. "And sometimes to watch the sunset from the ridge on the east side, best view in all of Kansas." Something in the way he said it made Eliza's heart skip. There was a wistfulness to his tone, a poetry hiding beneath the rough exterior. They arrived at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, a 2-story white clapboard building with a wide porch and flower boxes in the windows. A plump woman with graying hair and a kind face came bustling out before they even reached the steps. "You must be Miss Thornton. I got your telegram weeks ago. Come in, come in." "Oh, Hollow, thank you for helping her. You are always such a gentleman." "Ma'am," James said, tipping his hat. He set Eliza's bags on the porch and turned to leave, but then paused. "Miss Thornton, if you need anything at all, you can leave word at the Mercantile. They know how to reach me." "Thank you, Mr. Holloway. You have been most kind." He nodded and walked away, his long strides carrying him back toward the center of town. Eliza watched him go, feeling an unexpected pang of loss as he disappeared around a corner. "That man is one of the good ones," Mrs. Henderson said, following Eliza's gaze. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he has pulled more than one person out of trouble. Lost his whole family in the war, you know. Parents, 2 sisters. He was just a boy himself, but he made his way out here and built something from nothing. Works harder than any 3 men combined." Eliza filed this information away, her curiosity about James Holloway growing by the minute. The boarding house was indeed clean and comfortable. Mrs. Henderson showed her to a small room on the 2nd floor with a narrow bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a window that overlooked the street. It was not much, but it was hers, and after weeks of traveling, Eliza was grateful for a place to rest. "Supper is at 6, Mrs. Henderson informed her. "We have got beef stew tonight, fresh bread, and apple pie. You come down when you are ready." Alone at last, Eliza unpinned her hat and sank onto the bed. Her whole body ached from the journey, and her mind was spinning with everything she had seen and experienced in just one afternoon. But more than anything, she kept thinking about James Holloway and the way his eyes had softened when he mentioned watching the sunset. The next morning, Eliza made her way to the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building on the edge of town. It needed work. The windows were grimy, the floor was covered in dust, and the few books on the shelves were tattered and outdated. But it had desks and a blackboard and a pot-bellied stove for winter, and Eliza was determined to make it into a proper place of learning. She spent the entire day cleaning and organizing, only stopping when the light began to fade. Her hands were raw and her dress was filthy, but she felt a sense of accomplishment. School would start on Monday and she would be ready. As she locked the door and started back toward the boarding house, she noticed a figure on horseback, silhouetted against the dying light. James Holloway sat astride a beautiful chestnut mare on a small rise just outside of town, his face turned toward the western horizon where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink and gold. Eliza found herself walking toward him, drawn by something she could not name. Her footsteps must have alerted him because he turned and watched her approach. "Miss Thornton," he said, surprised, "what brings you out this way?" "I was working at the schoolhouse and saw you up here. I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all." He dismounted and stood beside his horse, one hand resting on the mare's neck. "This is my favorite spot in the whole territory. I come here most evenings when I can." "It is beautiful," Eliza said, and she meant it. From this vantage point, she could see the entire town spread out below them, and beyond that, the endless prairies stretching to the horizon. The sky was on fire with color, and the air had that particular quality of stillness that comes just before nightfall. "My mother used to say that every sunset was God's way of reminding us that even endings can be beautiful," James said quietly. "I think about that a lot." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun slip lower. "Do you write, Mr. Holloway?" Eliza asked suddenly. He looked at her sharply. "Why do you ask? You seem like someone who has thoughts that need expressing, and you mentioned your mother taught you well." A slow smile curved his lips. "I keep a journal, nothing fancy, just observations and thoughts. Sometimes I try my hand at poetry, though I am sure it is terrible. I doubt that very much. And you, Miss Thornton, do you write?" "Letters mostly, and I keep a diary of my travels. Nothing as poetic as capturing sunsets, I am afraid." James was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was almost shy. Would you like to watch the sunset with me sometime? I mean properly watch it, not just standing here making conversation. Eliza's heart fluttered in her chest. I would like that very much. Tomorrow evening then. I could meet you here after you finish at the schoolhouse. Yes, tomorrow. She walked back to the boarding house with a smile on her face and a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. True to his word, James was waiting for her the next evening. He had brought a blanket and a basket with bread, cheese, and apples. They sat on the ridge and watched as the sky transformed from blue to gold to pink to purple, talking about everything and nothing. Eliza learned that he was 26 years old, that he had come to Kansas right after the war ended, that he dreamed of building his ranch into something substantial enough to support a family someday. James learned that Eliza was 23, that she had always wanted to see the West, that she loved books more than almost anything else in the world. Almost anything, he teased. Well, I suppose I would have to love something else even more to give them up, she said, matching his playful tone. And what would that something be? Eliza felt herself blushing. I suppose I will know it when I find it. The days turned into weeks, and their evening meetings became a cherished routine. Every day, Eliza taught her students, a ragtag group of children ranging from age 6 to 14. They were wild and undisciplined at first, but gradually they began to learn. She taught them reading and writing, arithmetic and geography, and slowly but surely, she saw their minds opening to the possibilities of the world beyond Abilene. And every evening, weather permitting, she met James on the ridge. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. James told her stories about the ranch, about breaking horses and mending fences, about the satisfaction of working with his hands and seeing something grow from his efforts. Eliza told him about her students, about the joy of watching a child read their first full sentence, about her own childhood in Philadelphia, and why she had wanted to leave. I felt suffocated there, she admitted one evening in late July. The heat was oppressive, but a slight breeze made it bearable. Everyone had such fixed ideas about what a woman should be and do. I wanted adventure. I wanted to matter. You matter here, James said, his voice intense. Those children, they are learning because of you. You are changing their lives. And what about you, Mr. Holloway? Do I matter to you? It was a bold question, perhaps too bold, but Eliza was tired of dancing around what was growing between them. James turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers. Eliza, you matter more to me than I know how to say. I think about you every moment we are apart. When I see something beautiful, my first thought is that I want to share it with you. You have become essential to me in a way I never expected. Her breath caught in her throat. I feel the same way. He reached out and took her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. I know I should probably court you properly, call on you at the boarding house, take you to church socials, all of that. But the truth is, these evenings we spend together, they are more real to me than any formal courtship could be. They are real to me too. Eliza, I am not a rich man. My ranch is small and some years are harder than others, but I am building something solid, something that will last. And I would like to build it with you if you will have me. Are you asking me to marry you? Not yet. Not until I can do it properly, but I am asking if you would consider it. If you could see yourself making a life here with me. Eliza looked out at the sunset, at the land that had become home in such a short time, and then back at the man beside her. His face was open and vulnerable in a way she suspected he rarely allowed anyone to see. I can see it, she said softly. I can see it very clearly. James lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. They sat together as darkness fell, and for the first time in her life, Eliza felt truly, completely at peace. But life on the frontier was never peaceful for long. In early August, a group of outlaws rode into the territory, robbing homesteads and causing havoc. The marshal organized a posse, and James volunteered immediately. Eliza tried not to let her fear show as she watched him prepare to leave, but he saw right through her. "I will be back," he promised, cupping her face in his hands. "I will always come back to you. You cannot know that. Then I will make it true by sheer force of will." He kissed her then, their first real kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and more. His lips were warm and sure against hers, and she felt the promise in it, the commitment, the love that was growing between them. The posse rode out at dawn, and Eliza spent the next 3 days in a state of barely controlled anxiety. She taught her classes, but her mind was elsewhere. She ate meals without tasting them. She lay awake at night, listening to every sound, praying for his safe return. On the 3rd evening, she was sitting on the boarding house porch when she saw riders approaching. She leaped to her feet, her heart pounding, and nearly wept with relief when she recognized James's tall form. He was dusty and exhausted, but he was alive and whole. He dismounted before his horse had even fully stopped and strode toward her, pulling her into his arms right there in front of Mrs. Henderson and half the town. Eliza did not care who saw. She clung to him, breathing in the scent of leather and sweat and horse, feeling the solid reality of him. "I told you I would come back," he murmured into her hair. "Did you catch them?" "We did." "They are on their way to the territorial prison. It is over." That night, unable to sleep, Eliza sat at her small desk and wrote in her diary about her feelings, about the terror of those 3 days and the overwhelming relief of his return. She wrote about how she was falling in love with a cowboy who watched sunsets and kept journals and promised to always come back to her. What she did not know was that James was doing the same thing. In his small ranch house by lamplight, he sat with his leather-bound journal and wrote her name at the top of the page. Eliza Mae Thornton. Then he wrote about the sunset he had watched alone while tracking the outlaws, and how even that beauty had felt incomplete without her beside him. He wrote about the colors of the sky and the ache in his chest, and the certainty that she was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. He had been writing her name in his journal for weeks now, at the top of nearly every entry. It had become a ritual, a way of claiming his feelings, of making them real. Eliza Mae Thornton. Sometimes he wrote it over and over, filling whole pages, practicing the way it might look if followed by his own last name. Eliza Mae Holloway, Mrs. James Holloway, Eliza Holloway. The summer gave way to autumn, and with it came cooler temperatures and the changing of the leaves. Eliza's students were progressing wonderfully, and she felt proud of what they had accomplished. James's ranch was thriving. He had sold several horses for good prices, and had enough money saved to make improvements to his house and barn. They continued their evening meetings, but now they were even more precious because they both understood how fragile life could be. James told her more about his past, about the horrors of the war that had taken his family, about the years of drifting before he finally settled in Kansas. Eliza shared her own sorrows, a younger brother who had died of scarlet fever, a father who had never approved of her dreams of independence. "We are both orphans in a way," James observed one cool October evening. They were bundled in coats, sitting close together for warmth. "We can be each other's family," Eliza said. "I would like that very much." In late October, the town held a harvest dance, and James formally asked Eliza to accompany him. She wore her best dress, a deep green silk that she had brought from Philadelphia, and James cleaned up so well that she barely recognized him. Without his usual layer of dust and stubble, he was devastatingly handsome. They danced together all evening, and Eliza felt as though she were floating. The other townspeople smiled at them knowingly. Their courtship was the worst-kept secret in Abilene, and everyone seemed to approve. Mrs. Henderson had informed Eliza that she would be losing her best boarder soon enough. Mark her words. And the women of the church had already started hinting about weddings and what flowers would be available in the spring. "They are all planning our wedding," Eliza laughed as James spun her around the dance floor. "Let them plan," he said, grinning. "I have been planning it myself since about the second time I saw you. The second time, not the first. The first time I was too busy trying not to let you get trampled by cattle. The second time when you walked up that ridge to find me, that was when I knew. Knew what? That you were the one I had been waiting for. November brought the first real cold snap, and with it, a crisis. One of Eliza's students, a 10-year-old boy named Tommy, did not show up for school one morning. This was unusual because Tommy never missed a day. He loved learning and had progressed further than any of the other children in just a few short months. Eliza asked around and learned that Tommy's father had been injured in an accident at the mill and the family was struggling. She immediately organized the other families to help, collecting food and supplies, but she knew it was not enough. On impulse, she went to find James. He was at the livery stable in town, shoeing one of his horses. He looked up when she arrived, and his smile faded when he saw her worried expression. "What is wrong?" She explained the situation, and before she had even finished, James was nodding. "I will go out there tomorrow and see what needs to be done. If the father cannot work, maybe I can help with repairs around their place, make sure they have enough wood for winter." "You would do that, Eliza. Anyone you care about, I care about. Besides, no child should have to miss school because of hardship." He was true to his word. Over the next week, James spent every spare moment helping Tommy's family. He repaired their roof, chopped wood, and even gave them one of his horses to sell if they needed money. Word of his generosity spread through the town, and Eliza's heart swelled with pride and love. One evening in mid-November, as they sat together watching another spectacular sunset, Eliza turned to James with tears in her eyes. "What you did for Tommy's family, it was one of the kindest things I have ever witnessed." James looked uncomfortable with the praise. "It was nothing, just being neighborly. It was everything. You have such a good heart, James Holloway." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You bring out the best in me, Eliza. Before you came, I was just going through the motions, working, surviving, but not really living. You have given me purpose. You have given me joy. And you have given me a home," she whispered. "A real home, not just a place to live." As winter set in, their meetings became less frequent simply because of the weather. On particularly cold or snowy evenings, it was impossible to sit outside. But James found excuses to come into town more often, stopping by the schoolhouse to help Eliza with repairs or to bring her firewood for the stove. Sometimes he stayed and watched her teach, marveling at her patience and skill. In December, Eliza organized a Christmas program for the school, and all the families came to watch the children perform recitations and songs. James sat in the back of the room, and when Eliza caught his eye, the pride and love in his expression took her breath away. After the program, as families mingled and enjoyed the cookies and cider Eliza had prepared, James pulled her aside into the quiet of the cold evening air. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small wrapped package. "James, you should not have." "Open it." With trembling fingers, Eliza unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, much like the one she had seen James writing in. Her initials were tooled into the cover in elegant script. "I thought you might like a proper place to record your thoughts," he said. "And your adventures. You mentioned you kept a diary, but I have seen that little notebook you use and it is falling apart." "It is beautiful," Eliza breathed, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "Thank you. There is something else." He hesitated, then continued. "On the first page. I wrote something for you." Eliza opened the journal carefully. On the first page, in James's strong, clear handwriting, was a poem. It was about sunsets and new beginnings, about finding home in another person, about love that grows slowly and roots deeply. It was simple and heartfelt and absolutely perfect. "James," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." "I am not much of a poet," he said, shuffling his feet nervously, "but I wanted you to know how I feel. You are a wonderful poet, and I love you. I love you so much." It was the first time either of them had said the words aloud, and the impact was immediate. James pulled her close, kissing her with a passion that spoke of months of longing and restraint finally unleashed. "I love you, Eliza Mae Thornton," he said against her lips. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Marry me, please marry me." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." They were married on a cold January morning in 1879, in the small church on the edge of town. Eliza wore a new dress that the women of Abilene had helped her make, a beautiful cream-colored wool with lace at the collar and cuffs. James wore his best suit, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears. The ceremony was simple but moving. They exchanged vows before God and the entire town, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, James kissed her thoroughly, to the delight of everyone present. The reception was held at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, and it seemed like the whole town turned out to celebrate. There was food and music and dancing, and Eliza had never been happier in her life. She was now Mrs. James Holloway, and she was going home to the ranch to begin her new life. The ranch house was small but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting room, and a wide porch that faced west. James had spent weeks preparing it for her arrival, adding curtains to the windows, building new furniture, making sure everything was perfect. "Welcome home, Mrs. Holloway," he said, carrying her over the threshold. That night, as they lay in each other's arms in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives, Eliza felt a completeness she had never known was possible. She had found her place in the world, and it was beside this good, kind, strong man who wrote poetry about sunsets and loved her with his whole heart. Life at the ranch was hard work, but Eliza thrived. She continued teaching, riding into town 3 times a week to hold classes. On the days she was home, she helped James with the ranch work, learning to care for the horses, tend the garden, and manage the household. They worked side by side, building their life together one day at a time. In the evenings, they still watched the sunsets together, sitting on the porch with cups of coffee or tea, James's arm around her shoulders. And every single evening, James wrote in his journal. Eliza often saw him scribbling away by lamplight after she had gone to bed, and she wondered what he was writing. She found out by accident one day in early spring. James had ridden into town to pick up supplies, and Eliza was tidying the house when she knocked over a stack of books on his desk. As she bent to pick them up, several journals tumbled to the floor, falling open. Without meaning to pry, Eliza saw her name written at the top of one page, then another. Then another. Curious now, she picked up the most recent journal and began to read. What she found took her breath away. Page after page, entry after entry, James had written her name. Sometimes it was just Eliza Mae Thornton at the top of his observations about the day, but more often, entire passages were devoted to her. He wrote about the way she laughed, the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the sound of her voice when she read to him in the evenings. He wrote about watching sunsets and wishing she was there, about seeing beauty in the world and wanting to share it with her. There were poems, dozens of them, all about her. Some were simple and sweet, others were more complex, but all of them were filled with such deep, abiding love that Eliza found herself weeping as she read. One entry, dated from the previous August when he had gone with the posse, was particularly moving. He had written her name over and over at the top of the page, as if to anchor himself, and then described watching a sunset alone while on the trail. He wrote about the colors of the sky, about the beauty of the landscape, but then he wrote, "And yet all I could think was that this sunset was incomplete without Eliza beside me. Every sunset I have watched since meeting her bears her name in my heart. I write it here to make it real, to claim it, to say before God and the universe that this woman is my destiny. Eliza Mae Thornton, Eliza Mae Thornton, Eliza Mae Holloway. I will make that last name real. I will marry her if she will have me." Tears streamed down Eliza's face as she read entry after entry chronicling the depth of his love. There were observations about her teaching, about how proud he was of her, about how she had changed his life. There were descriptions of moments she had long forgotten, tiny details that had meant the world to him. The time she had laughed at one of his terrible jokes. The time she had touched his hand when he was worried about the ranch. The time she had fallen asleep on his shoulder during a long ride back from town. He had documented their entire courtship from his perspective, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever read. She was still sitting there, surrounded by journals and tears, when James returned home. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene, and his face went pale. "Eliza, I can explain." She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears, and he clearly thought she was upset. He started toward her, apologies already forming on his lips, but she held up a hand to stop him. "James Holloway, you wrote my name on every sunset you watched," he froze. "You read my journals." "I did not mean to pry. I knocked them over and they fell open and I saw my name and I could not stop reading." She stood, still holding one of the journals. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since the beginning, since the first day I met you." He looked ashamed. "I know it is probably strange, James, it is the most romantic thing I have ever heard." She crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "You wrote poetry about me, you documented every moment of our love story. You claimed me in your heart long before you claimed me in reality." "I did not know any other way to express what I was feeling," he said quietly. "The feelings were so big, so overwhelming, and I needed to get them out somehow. Writing your name, writing about you, it helped me understand what was happening to me. And what was happening to you. I was falling in love so hard and so fast that it terrified me. I had never felt anything like it. I needed to capture it, to hold on to it, to make it real." Eliza threw her arms around his neck and kissed him with all the love in her heart. "You beautiful, wonderful man. Do you know what this means to me? To know that I was in your thoughts and your heart from the very beginning, to see our love story written in your words. You are not angry that I invaded your privacy? How could I be angry? You were not writing about private things. You were writing about love, about us, about building a life together." She pulled back to look at him. "Promise me you will keep doing it, keep writing in your journals. Keep documenting our life together. Someday, when we are old and gray, we can read them together and remember." "I promise," he said, relief flooding his features. "I will write every day until my hands cannot hold a pen anymore." They stood there in the middle of their small ranch house, holding each other, and Eliza felt her heart overflow with gratitude. She had come to Kansas seeking adventure and independence, and she had found so much more. She had found a partner, a lover, a best friend. She had found a man who loved her so much he wrote her name on every sunset. As spring turned to summer, Eliza discovered she was pregnant. The joy on James's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. He immediately became protective to the point of being overbearing, insisting she stop riding into town for school, worrying about her doing too much work around the ranch. "James, I am pregnant, not dying," she laughed one afternoon when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I just want you and the baby to be safe. We are safe, we are healthy, and I need to keep busy or I will go mad." They compromised. Eliza continued teaching but cut back her hours, and James hired a young man from town to help with the heavier ranch work. Together they prepared for the baby's arrival, turning the small second bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle, collecting tiny clothes and blankets. In the evenings they sat on the porch as always, watching the sunsets. James's hand would rest on Eliza's growing belly, feeling the baby kick and move, and his face would light up with wonder. "What do you think about?" Eliza asked him one evening in late summer. "When you sit here and watch the sun go down." "I think about how lucky I am," James said simply. "I think about how my life could have gone so many different ways, but somehow I ended up here with you, about to become a father. I think about all the sunsets I watched alone before you came and how empty they were compared to this. And I think about all the sunsets we will watch together in the years to come. And do you still write about them? Every single one. Except now I write about how you look in the golden light, how your hand feels in mine, how the baby moves when the sun touches your belly." The sunsets are even more beautiful now because they include you. Their son was born on a crisp October morning, with Mrs. Henderson and the doctor in attendance. It was a long, difficult labor, and James paced outside the bedroom for hours, terrified and helpless. But when he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst into tears of relief. "You have a son," Mrs. Henderson announced, opening the door, "and your wife is asking for you." James entered the room to find Eliza exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. She looked up at him with such love that his breath caught. "Meet your son," she said softly. James approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was already waving tiny fists in the air. Something in James's chest cracked wide open, and he realized that his capacity for love had just expanded beyond anything he thought possible. "He is perfect," James whispered. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." "We did this," Eliza corrected. "He is ours." They named him Daniel, after James's father, and from the moment he entered their lives, everything changed. The ranch house was filled with the sounds of a baby crying, cooing, and eventually laughing. Eliza took a break from teaching to focus on motherhood, and James found ways to do his ranch work while still being present for his family. Every evening, without fail, James wrote in his journal. Now, his entries included observations about Daniel, about watching his son grow and change, about the overwhelming responsibility and joy of fatherhood. But he still wrote about Eliza too, about how she had blossomed into motherhood, about how much he loved watching her with their son. And he still wrote her name at the top of every entry about sunsets. Eliza Mae Holloway, his wife, the mother of his child, the love of his life. Daniel grew from an infant to a toddler, curious and energetic and constantly getting into things. The ranch prospered. James bought more land and expanded his horse breeding operation, developing a reputation for quality animals that spread throughout the territory. Eliza eventually returned to teaching part-time, bringing Daniel with her to school and letting the older children help watch him. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and crop failures, the everyday struggles of frontier life. But through it all, James and Eliza faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each challenge overcome. In 1882, Eliza gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair, and she was as sweet-natured as Daniel was rambunctious. James was utterly besotted with his daughter, and Eliza often found him just staring at her in wonder, as if he could not believe something so perfect existed. "I have 2 children now," he said to Eliza one evening as they watched Daniel chase fireflies in the yard while Sarah slept in her mother's arms. "2 perfect, healthy, beautiful children, and a wife who is the best thing that ever happened to me. How did I get so lucky?" "It was not luck," Eliza said. "It is love, love and hard work and commitment. You are right, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of this family." As their children grew, James began reading his old journals to them at bedtime. Daniel and Sarah loved hearing stories about how their parents met, about the sunsets and the courtship, about their father writing their mother's name over and over in his journals. "Tell us about the first sunset," Sarah would beg, snuggled against her father's side. And James would tell them about standing on the ridge outside Abilene, watching the sky turn colors he had no words for, and how Eliza had walked up the hill toward him and changed his life forever. "I knew right then that she was special," he would say. "I went home that night and wrote her name in my journal, and I have been writing it ever since." "Even now?" Daniel asked. "Even now? Every time I write about a sunset, I write your mother's name, because she is the sunset, the sunrise, and everything in between. She is the light of my life." Eliza would listen from the doorway, her heart full. And later, when the children were asleep, she would kiss her husband and thank him for loving her so completely. In 1885, tragedy struck when a fire swept through part of Abilene, destroying several buildings including the school. No one was hurt, thankfully, as the fire happened at night, but Eliza was devastated. Years of work, all the books and supplies she had accumulated, the children's projects and papers, all gone. James held her while she cried, and then he did what he always did. He took action. Within days, he had organized the men of the town to begin building a new school, bigger and better than the one that had burned. He donated lumber from his own land and worked from sunrise to sunset alongside the other men. The new school was ready by fall, and it was beautiful. It had large windows to let in plenty of light, a separate room for storing supplies, and even a small library that the town had rallied to stock with books. At the dedication ceremony, the town council announced that the school would be named Holloway School, in honor of James's generosity and Eliza's years of dedicated teaching. Eliza cried again, but this time they were tears of joy and gratitude. Her dream of educating children on the frontier had not only survived, but had grown into something more substantial and lasting than she had ever imagined. That evening, the whole family sat on the porch and watched the sunset together. Daniel was 8 years old now, tall and serious like his father. Sarah was 5, chattering away about her day. Eliza was pregnant again, just barely showing, and James had his arm around her, his hand resting protectively on her stomach. "This is everything I never knew I wanted," James said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "This family, this life, this moment, I want to remember it forever." "Then write it down," Eliza said, smiling. "Write it in your journal so we never forget." That night, after the children were asleep and Eliza had gone to bed, James sat at his desk with his journal open before him. He wrote about the sunset, describing the particular quality of the light, the way the clouds had been streaked with pink and gold. He wrote about his children, about Daniel's questions and Sarah's laughter. He wrote about Eliza, about the baby growing inside her, about the school that now bore their name. And at the top of the page, as he had done thousands of times before, he wrote, "Eliza Mae Holloway, his wife, his love." His life, their third child, a son they named Thomas, was born in the spring of 1886. By this time, the ranch had grown substantially, and James had hired several hands to help with the work. They had built a larger house with more bedrooms, a proper dining room, and a study where James could keep his journals and do paperwork. Eliza had given up teaching full-time to focus on raising their children, but she still held classes a few times a week for the younger students and worked with the new teacher the town had hired. She loved being a mother, loved watching her children grow and learn and become their own people. Daniel was showing signs of being a natural horseman, following his father around the ranch and learning everything he could. Sarah was proving to be a talented artist, always drawing pictures of the landscape, the animals, her family. And Thomas was still too young to show his personality, but he was a happy, healthy baby who rarely cried and seemed content just to observe the world around him. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. James ran the ranch with skill and dedication, building it into one of the most successful operations in the region. Eliza managed the household and continued her involvement with the school. The children grew and thrived. And every evening, weather permitting, the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset together. It became a tradition, something sacred and special. No matter what else was happening, no matter how busy the day had been, they always made time for those few minutes of peace and beauty as the sun slipped below the horizon. And James continued his nightly ritual of writing in his journal, documenting their life together in careful detail. He filled journal after journal, keeping them all in a special cabinet in his study. Eliza would sometimes see him reading over old entries, a soft smile on his face as he remembered. "What are you reading?" she would ask. "The entry from the day we met. I like to remind myself how it all started." "And how did it start?" "With you walking up a hill toward me and me falling in love at first sight." In 1890, Daniel turned 13, and James began teaching him the more complex aspects of running the ranch. Sarah was 11, and she was helping her mother with Thomas, who was now an energetic 4-year-old. The family was strong and healthy, and the ranch was more prosperous than ever. One summer evening, as they all sat watching the sunset, Daniel asked a question that had clearly been on his mind for a while. "Papa, you always write about the sunsets. Can I read what you write?" James hesitated, glancing at Eliza. She nodded encouragingly. "I suppose you are old enough now," James said. "But you have to understand, son, these journals are very personal. They are my private thoughts and feelings." "I know, Papa. I just want to understand. You seem so peaceful when you watch the sunsets, and I want to feel that too." That night, James brought out one of his older journals and read several entries aloud to his family. He read about meeting Eliza, about their courtship, about the sunsets they had watched together. He read about the day Daniel was born, about holding his son for the first time and feeling his whole world shift. The children listened, rapt, and Eliza found herself crying quietly, moved by the beauty of her husband's words and the depth of his love. "You really wrote Mama's name every time?" Sarah asked in wonder. "Every single time," James confirmed. "I still do. It is my way of honoring her, of acknowledging that everything good in my life comes from her." "That is the most romantic thing I have ever heard," Sarah sighed, and Eliza laughed through her tears. "Your father is a romantic, even if he pretends not to be." Time continued its steady march forward. Daniel grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, with a natural gift for working with horses. Sarah became a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's quiet strength. Thomas was showing signs of being the scholar of the family, always reading and asking questions about everything. In 1895, when Daniel was 18, he fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Her name was Margaret, and she was sweet and kind and perfect for him. James and Eliza watched their son experience the same dizzying joy of first love that they had experienced so many years ago, and they were happy for him. Daniel asked James for advice on courting, and James gave him one of his old journals to read. "Learn from what I did right and what I did wrong," James said. "But most importantly, be honest, be genuine. Let her see who you really are, and if she loves you anyway, then you have found the right person." Daniel and Margaret were married the following spring, and it was a joyous occasion. The whole town came out to celebrate, and James gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying at the same time. "To my son and his beautiful bride," James said, raising his glass. "May you have a love story as beautiful as the one I have been blessed to live. May you watch sunsets together and find peace in each other's presence. And may you always remember that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every single day." As Daniel and Margaret started their own life together, building a house on the edge of the Holloway Ranch, James felt the bittersweet pang of watching his child grow up and move on. But he also felt immense pride and satisfaction. He had raised a good man, and that man was now beginning his own family legacy. Sarah, at 16, was being courted by the son of the town doctor, a studious young man named William who treated her with respect and admiration. Thomas, at 13, was still more interested in books than girls, but James knew that would change soon enough. Life continued to be good. The ranch was thriving. The family was healthy and happy. And James still wrote in his journal every evening, still documented the sunsets, still wrote Eliza's name at the top of the page. One evening in late summer of 1896, as James and Eliza sat alone on the porch watching the sun go down, Eliza turned to her husband with a soft smile. "Do you realize we have been married for 17 years? 17 years, 7 months, and 12 days, James said immediately. "But who is counting?" Eliza laughed. "You are, apparently. I count every day because every day with you is a gift." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I never get tired of this, Eliza, sitting here with you, watching the light change, feeling the peace of the evening settle in. I could do this forever and it would never be enough. We have built such a beautiful life together, Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion. Sometimes I think about that girl who stepped off the stagecoach in Abilene, so scared and uncertain, and I barely recognize her. I recognize her. She had courage and determination and dreams. She still does. And I think about the cowboy who saved me from being trampled by cattle, who watched sunsets alone and wrote poetry in secret. He is still here too, just with more gray in his hair. James laughed and ran a hand through his hair, which was indeed showing threads of silver. We are getting old, Mrs. Holloway. We are getting better, Eliza corrected. Like fine wine. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear Daniel and Margaret laughing, and closer by, Sarah was playing the piano while Thomas sang along badly on purpose to make her laugh. "This is my heaven," James said quietly. "Right here, right now, nothing else could ever come close." In 1898, Sarah married William in a beautiful ceremony, and the following year, she gave birth to James and Eliza's first grandchild, a little girl named Emma. The joy of becoming grandparents was indescribable. James held baby Emma with the same wonder and tenderness he had shown to his own children, and Eliza felt her heart expand yet again. Daniel and Margaret had their first child that same year, a boy named James after his grandfather. James was deeply moved by the honor, and he wrote an entire journal entry about holding his namesake and feeling the continuation of his legacy in the tiny weight of his grandson. Thomas, now 17, had earned a scholarship to attend college back east, something that filled his parents with both pride and a touch of sadness. He would be the first in the family to get a formal higher education, and they were incredibly proud, but they would miss him terribly. The night before Thomas left for college, the family gathered for a special sunset viewing. Everyone was there, including Daniel and Margaret with baby James, Sarah and William with baby Emma. They crowded onto the porch, 3 generations of Holloways, and watched as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. James stood with his arm around Eliza, looking at the family they had created, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude and love. This was his legacy. Not just the ranch or the money or the success, but this family, these people, this love that had grown and multiplied beyond anything he could have imagined. That night, he wrote in his journal for a long time, trying to capture the feelings of the evening. He wrote about each member of his family, about the unique joy each one brought to his life. He wrote about the sunset, about the particular shade of orange that had streaked across the clouds. And he wrote about Eliza, as he always did, about how she had made all of this possible. "I wrote her name on every sunset I watched," he wrote, "and she gave me a life more beautiful than any sunset could ever be." The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as life always does. In 1902, Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep, and James and Eliza mourned the woman who had been such an important part of their story. In 1904, James's ranch foreman, who had been with him for over 20 years, died in an accident, and James felt the loss keenly. But there were more joys than sorrows. More grandchildren were born. Daniel and Margaret had 3 children in total. Sarah and William had 4. Thomas, after finishing college, returned to Kansas with a wife named Catherine and started teaching at the university in Lawrence. They had twin boys, much to everyone's delight. The Holloway Ranch became the center of a sprawling family network, with children and grandchildren visiting regularly, holiday gatherings that filled the house with noise and laughter, and Sunday dinners that required multiple tables and enough food to feed an army. Through it all, James and Eliza remained the steady center. They were the foundation upon which everything else was built, and their love continued to be the example that everyone else followed. In 1910, James turned 58, and Eliza organized a surprise party for him. The entire family gathered, and when James walked into the packed house, he was genuinely shocked and touched. But the real surprise came later when Eliza presented him with a leather-bound book. He opened it curiously and found that she had transcribed his journal entries, copying them out in her neat handwriting, organizing them chronologically and by theme. There were sections for courtship entries, sections for family entries, sections for sunset descriptions. "I have been working on this for 2 years," Eliza said softly, as James paged through the book with tears in his eyes. "I wanted you to see what I see when I read your journals. I wanted you to understand how beautiful your words are, how important this record of our life is." "Eliza, this is incredible. You wrote my name on every sunset," she said, her own eyes wet with tears. "You documented our love story in a way that most people only dream of. This is our legacy, James, not just the children and grandchildren, but this. This proof that love is real and lasting and worth everything." James set the book down and pulled his wife into his arms, holding her tight as their family looked on with knowing smiles. After all these years, after all the sunsets they had watched together, the depth of their love was still the most beautiful thing any of them had ever witnessed. In 1915, as James approached his mid-60s, he began to slow down. His joints ached in the morning and he tired more easily than he used to. But his mind was still sharp, and he still insisted on writing in his journal every evening. Eliza worried about him, but she knew better than to try to make him stop working. The ranch was his purpose, his identity, and she would not take that away from him. One afternoon in early summer, as James was working in the barn, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He sat down quickly, breathing hard, and waited for it to pass. It did eventually, but it scared him. He said nothing to Eliza, not wanting to worry her, but he knew what it meant. That evening, as they sat watching the sunset, James held Eliza's hand tightly. "I want you to know something," he said quietly. "What is it?" "Every day with you has been a blessing, every single day. Even the hard ones, the days when nothing went right and everything was a struggle, even those days were blessings because I faced them with you." "James, why are you talking like this? I just need you to know. I need you to understand that if my life ended tomorrow, I would die a happy man because I had this. I had you. I had our family. I had more love than most people experience in 10 lifetimes. You are not dying tomorrow," Eliza said firmly, but there was fear in her eyes. "None of us know when our time will come. I just want to make sure you know how much I love you. How grateful I am that you took a chance on a cowboy who could barely string 2 words together without stumbling over his own tongue." "You have always been eloquent to me," Eliza said, tears streaming down her face. From the very first moment. They sat together as darkness fell, holding hands, both aware that time was more precious than ever. James had several more episodes over the following months, and finally Eliza insisted he see the doctor. The diagnosis was what they both feared. His heart was weakening. The doctor recommended rest and less physical labor, and James grudgingly agreed to let Daniel take over more of the ranch management. It was hard for James to step back, to watch others do the work he had done for so many years. But he found new purpose in spending time with his grandchildren, in teaching them about the ranch and the land, and in continuing to write in his journals. He also began a new project, writing a special journal for each of his grandchildren, filled with advice and stories and life lessons. He wanted them to know him, really know him, even after he was gone. He wanted them to understand the values he had lived by, the love that had sustained him, the importance of family and commitment, and choosing to see beauty in the world even when things were hard. In 1920, James celebrated his 68th birthday surrounded by his entire family. There were now 12 grandchildren, ranging in age from newborn to 21, and they filled the house with energy and joy. James sat in his favorite chair, looking at the faces of all these people who carried his blood and his legacy, and felt a deep sense of peace. That evening, as he and Eliza sat on the porch alone, watching what had to be the 1000th sunset they had witnessed together, James turned to his wife with a smile. "Do you remember the first sunset we watched together?" "Of course I do." "You were so nervous, trying to make conversation and stumbling over your words. I was terrified. I thought you were the most beautiful, intelligent, sophisticated woman I had ever met, and I was just a ranch hand with dirt under his fingernails. You were never just anything, James Holloway. You were always extraordinary to me. We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Eliza agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in silence for a while, watching the colors shift and change in the sky. Finally, James spoke again. "I want to be buried here on this ridge so I can watch the sunsets forever." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but she nodded. "All right, and when my time comes, I will be right beside you, together for all eternity." "Together for all eternity," Eliza echoed. James lived for another 5 years, and they were good years despite his failing health. He got to see more grandchildren born, got to watch Daniel's eldest son take over much of the ranch work, got to hold Sarah's first great-grandchild in his arms. He continued writing in his journals until his hands became too shaky to hold a pen properly, and even then he dictated entries to Eliza, who wrote them down for him. In the spring of 1925, James caught a cold that turned into pneumonia. Despite the doctor's best efforts, his weakened heart could not fight the infection. Surrounded by Eliza and his children, James Holloway passed away peacefully on a warm May evening, just as the sun was setting. His last words were to Eliza, "Write my name on the sunsets now. Remember me when the sky turns gold." The grief that followed was profound. James had been the center of so many lives, and his absence left a hole that nothing could fill. But even in their sorrow, the family took comfort in the legacy he had left behind. They buried him on the ridge where he had watched so many sunsets, in a spot with a clear view to the west. The headstone was simple: James Holloway, 1852 to 1925. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. He wrote her name on every sunset at the funeral. Daniel read from one of his father's journals, a passage about love and family and the importance of cherishing every moment. There was not a dry eye in the crowd. After everyone had left, Eliza stayed behind, sitting on the grass beside the fresh grave. She opened the most recent journal, the one James had been working on before he died, and read the last entry he had dictated to her. "Today I watched the sunset with Eliza as I have done thousands of times before. The sky was particularly beautiful, streaked with pink and gold. But as always, the real beauty was not in the sky but in the woman beside me. Eliza Mae Holloway, my wife, my love, my life. I wrote her name on every sunset I watched, and she gave me a lifetime of happiness in return. If I have learned anything in my 68 years, it is this: love is the only thing that matters. Love is what endures. And I am the luckiest man who ever lived because I had the privilege of loving Eliza and being loved by her every single day of my adult life." Eliza closed the journal and pressed it to her heart, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, James Holloway," she whispered. "I will love you forever." Life went on, as it always does. Eliza lived for another 15 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued to be the heart of the family, the keeper of stories, the one who made sure everyone remembered where they came from and the love that had built their family. She kept all of James's journals in a special trunk, and sometimes, on difficult days, she would take them out and read random entries, letting his words comfort her. She read about their courtship, about the early days of their marriage, about the births of their children, about ordinary moments that he had made extraordinary through the power of his love and his words. Every evening, weather permitting, Eliza sat on the porch and watched the sunset. And every evening, she thought of James and imagined him watching the same sunset from wherever he was. She found peace in the ritual, in the continuity of it. On her 80th birthday, Eliza gathered her entire family together for a special occasion. When everyone was assembled, she brought out the trunk containing James's journals. "These are your inheritance," she told them. "Not just Daniel's or Sarah's or Thomas's, but all of you. These journals contain the story of your family, the foundation of everything you are. They show you what real love looks like, what commitment means, how to build a life that matters." She distributed the journals among the grandchildren, giving each of them several volumes to keep and treasure. "Read them," she said. "Learn from them. And when you find love, remember what your grandfather taught us all. Love is a choice you make every day. Choose it. Write it down. Make it real." In the summer of 1940, Eliza Mae Holloway passed away peacefully in her sleep, 2 weeks after her 83rd birthday. Her children found her in the morning, lying in the bed she had shared with James for so many years, a peaceful smile on her face. In her hand was one of James's journals, open to an entry from their wedding day. They buried her beside James on the ridge, just as she had requested. Her headstone read, "Eliza Mae Holloway, 1855 to 1940, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother." She found his journal and wept with love on the evening of her funeral. The entire family gathered on the ridge to watch the sunset together. There were dozens of them now, 4 generations of Holloways, all descended from the love between a cowboy and a schoolteacher who had met on the dusty streets of Abilene more than 60 years before. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange, Daniel spoke for all of them. "They are together now," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Watching the sunsets together for all eternity just as they did in life. And we are the proof of their love, the living legacy of what they built together. We carry their story in our blood and in our hearts, and we will pass it down to our children and our children's children, so that no one ever forgets the power of true love." The sun slipped below the horizon, and as darkness fell, the family stood together in silence, each of them thinking about James and Eliza, about the journals and the sunsets and the beautiful love story that had created them all. Years later, one of the great-grandchildren, a young woman named Elizabeth who had been named after Eliza, became a writer. She took her great-grandfather's journals and turned them into a book, a chronicle of life on the frontier and a love story for the ages. The book became a bestseller, and suddenly the whole world knew about James Holloway, the cowboy who wrote his beloved's name on every sunset he watched. People came from all over to visit the ridge where James and Eliza were buried, to see the place where they had spent so many evenings together. The town of Abilene erected a historical marker telling their story, and the school that Eliza had helped to build still bore the Holloway name. But for the family, the real legacy was not the fame or the recognition. It was the understanding of what love could be, what it should be. It was the example James and Eliza had set, showing that love was not just passion and romance, though it was those things too. Love was also commitment and partnership, daily choices and small kindnesses, working together to build something that would outlast you both. Every generation of Holloways grew up reading James's journals, learning about their family history, understanding the foundation they were built on. And every generation produced at least one person who continued the tradition, keeping journals, writing down their thoughts and observations, documenting their own love stories for future generations to read. The ranch itself remained in the family for over 100 years, passed down from father to son, mother to daughter, each generation adding to it and improving it while maintaining the essential character that James had established. It became a symbol of endurance and legacy, proof that with hard work and love, something built can last. And on the ridge where James and Eliza were buried, where they had watched so many sunsets together, wildflowers grew in profusion every spring. The family tended the graves carefully, keeping them neat and decorated, but mostly they just sat there, watching the sunsets as James and Eliza had done, feeling connected to the past and to each other. On the 100th anniversary of James and Eliza's first meeting, in 1978, the family organized a massive reunion. Over 200 people gathered, all of them descendants of that cowboy and schoolteacher who had fallen in love over sunsets and journal entries. They came from all over the country, from all walks of life, but they all shared the same foundation, the same story, the same legacy of love. They gathered on the ridge at sunset, standing in a huge circle around James and Eliza's graves. And as the sun began to set, casting its golden light over everyone assembled, the eldest member of the family, Thomas's son, who was now 90 years old, read from James's very first journal entry about Eliza. "Today I met a woman who has changed everything. Her name is Eliza Mae Thornton, and she is the most remarkable person I have ever encountered. I saved her from being trampled by cattle, and in doing so, I think she saved me from a life of loneliness. I can already tell that she is going to be important to me, though I cannot yet say how or why. I only know that when I sat down to write about today's sunset, all I could think about was her face in the golden light. Eliza Mae Thornton. I am writing her name here to make it real, to claim the hope I feel, to acknowledge that something has shifted in my world. Eliza Mae Thornton." A new beginning. There was not a dry eye in the crowd. People held each other, feeling the weight of history and legacy and the incredible endurance of love. They watched as the sun set in a blaze of color, painting the sky in shades that James would have documented in his journal, and they felt his presence and Eliza's presence all around them. This was what love could build. Not just a family, though that was remarkable enough, but a legacy of understanding what mattered, of choosing love every day, of documenting and cherishing and honoring the bond between two people. James had written Eliza's name on every sunset he watched, and she had wept with love when she found his journals. And from that simple, beautiful foundation, they had created something that would endure for generations. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the family dispersed slowly, reluctantly, not wanting the evening to end. But they carried with them the reminder of what they came from, the knowledge that they were part of something bigger than themselves, the understanding that love, real love, was the most powerful force in the universe. And on that ridge in Kansas, where a cowboy and a schoolteacher had watched countless sunsets together over the course of their lifetime, the wildflowers swayed in the evening breeze. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when this life is done, James and Eliza Holloway watched another sunset together, their hands intertwined, their love as strong and enduring as it had ever been. The end.